So, nice to be here again. Kim asked me to talk a little bit about the book that I had come out earlier on in the year, and particularly the first couple of chapters. And because fortunately or unfortunately, depending on which way you want to look at it, my flight was cancelled for next Monday. It means I can come here next Monday as well. So you're going to have to put up with me for 2 Mondays. What it means, in fact, is that I'm happy to talk about the theme of the first chapter tonight, and then on next Monday, the second chapter. Then we can do in 2 evenings. So maybe just to say briefly that this book, Tasting the Essence of Tantra, is really exploring, I suppose, what's come out for me over many years of practice of really wanting to see how the sort of, if you like, the heart of what meditation means within the context of tantric practice. And that may sound like a strange thing to say, but a lot of tantric practice can be involved in recitations and, reciting of texts and this sort of thing, with deity practices, and sometimes can miss some element of the potential depth of meditation that can also be there. And so what I wanted to do in this book was to really talk about what it can mean for us to bring a certain depth of meditation into practice and how that affects our practice. So the first chapter in the book is, I've forgotten what it's called now. I think it's called Preparing. Tell me, what's it called? What's the first chapter called? Preparation. Preparations for practice. There you go. Can't even remember what I've written. And what I wanted to say in this particular chapter is that, if you like, tantric practice is based on Sutra understanding and Sutra experience. And it was interesting for me in my earlier years of study of the Tibetan tradition that Lama Tsongkhapa was very clear in what he felt were 3 essential ingredients of the Sutra path that would be the sort of key basis, the key ground upon which tantric practice could then rest. And so he wrote a text called The 3 Principal Aspects of the Path. And these 3 ingredients have always felt to me to be so essential in terms of what we need if we wish to embark upon tantric practice. And I was taught them very early on, and the emphasis, certainly from Lama Yeshe, was that these were so important and what is extraordinary about actually Lama Tsongkhapa's teaching on this is that they are, in a way, if you were to encapsulate the whole of the Buddhist Sutra teachings down into their essential ingredients, one could say that these 3 principles are right at the heart of it. So they've always felt to me to be kind of key elements. So these 3, I want to speak about them maybe from a slightly different perspective, because I want to talk about them, particularly how they are significant in relationship to where we might go with the journey of tantric practice. So how to put it, the flavour of them may be subtly different as we think about them as ingredients at the heart of as the basis for tantric practice. So let me just try and explore that a little bit. So these three in Tibetan, the first one is called Ngejung, and it's variously translated as renunciation and something else which I want to come back to. So Ngejung. The second is Changchu Sem, or bodhicitta, and the third is Yeshe, or wisdom, realization of emptiness. So these are the three essential principles. So Ngejung, I'm referring to Ngejung in particular with that phrase in Tibetan because it's often translated as renunciation. And I'm not so comfortable with that translation of that term in a way. It may be the term we're familiar with. But actually the meaning of the term Ngejung is a bit different. So Jungwa in Tibetan means to emerge. And it's interesting, maybe this is the remnant of my knowledge of Tibetan coming up here. I did study Tibetan, and a lot of it has vanished from my brain. But Jungwa is to emerge. Now, there's another word which is very similar. When you look at the Tibetan, it's written very similarly, but it has a slightly different inflection on it. Jingwa means to sink. So Jingwa is to sink, Jungwa is to emerge. Now, why am I saying that? Lama Tsongkhapa talks about us sinking or drowning in the ocean of samsara. Yeah? And Jungwa is emerging from that drowning process. Now, I suppose the idea of us drowning is an interesting one psychologically. You know, I, as a psychotherapist, I've had many occasions when people have come into the therapeutic space and I've had a sense that they were drowning, that they were just not coping, struggling, kind of lost in a space that could barely kind of lift their head above the water kind of thing. So not coping, drowning. So in a way, the notion of Jingwa is where we get lost in a way of life where we're maybe not coping on one level, or where we have tended to go so unconscious, we're living very unconsciously, and we're kind of lost on some level. Now we may say, well, most of us here, maybe we're not drowning, you know, Silicon Valley, we're not drowning, you know. Very fortunate, incredibly fortunate. So there's another sense in which we're Jingwa, we're drowning. That is, it's very easy for us to get lost in unconscious patterns, habits, kind of anesthetized ways of living, you know, that well, we've actually become quite sophisticated, haven't we, at anesthetizing some of the difficulties, the pain, the emotional problems and so on. We're quite good at it. Yeah, it could be Netflix, it could be food, it could be sex, it could be work, relationships. You know, we use so many things in our life that can become habits, patterns, ways of being that enable us to stay unconscious, that kind of give a sense of, if you like, comfort and safety on one level, because we're not having to feel or deal with certain things. Yeah? And we could say that these things become a kind of refuge to us. So we have lots of ways in which we maybe use our life or things in our life as a way of avoiding, I suppose. You know, it can be quite subtle, can't it? And I guess there's something about can I begin to recognize these habits or these ways of being for myself and begin to wake up. So the notion of ngejung, where jungwa means to emerge, is really implying that rather than sinking in these habits and these patterns, these ways of being that keep us unconscious, that maybe keep us comfortable and safe but not aware, instead of that, jungwa is about emerging, is about waking up to my ways of being that are not beneficial, that are not supportive of a healthy life, if you like, on one level, that are not supportive of on some level, facing up to ourselves in our life, perhaps. So jungwa is about that emergence, about waking up, about beginning to face our life and engage in our life with a sort of willingness to do that, a willingness to be awake. So the ngejung bit is interesting because the ne bit means definitely. So it's always struck me as being interesting that we've translated this word ngejung as renunciation. If we retake the meaning of the term ngejung, it means to definitely emerge. So to definitely wake up, to have that sense of, I can see my habits, I can see what I do, or I begin to recognize where I stay unconscious. I begin to recognize where I get caught up in my attachments to material things or to habits and patterns that sustain a kind of unconsciousness. And instead of that, to begin to wake up, to definitely wake up. There's a kind of determination in that, to wake up and engage with our life in a way that faces where we get caught in these patterns. Now for me that's a very different interpretation, if you like, or different translation of the term ngejung to renunciation. Now that doesn't mean to say that the word renunciation isn't appropriate, because we could say that, for some people, maybe for a monk, the notion of renouncing worldly life, of abandoning worldly life, is very significant, actually, and to be applauded. Don't think I could do it. But I think the tricky thing for me when I was in my early years as a Tibetan Buddhist was that the phrase that I heard very often was, I think it went along the lines of abandoning attachment to the happiness of this life, or abandoning attachment to worldly life. Now, when I heard that phrase, for some reason or other, I missed the word attachment to. And so I went along with the sense of, I've got to abandon the happiness of this life, or I've got to abandon worldly life. And so I went through this whole process of anything that I felt I enjoyed, or that I, possessions I might have, or things like music or whatever, I would just give them all up. So I had all these musical instruments. And I thought, oh no, I have to renounce these music. So I gave them all away. I can't believe it when I think about it. And it was a time when I was doing a lot of studies, and this may sound crazy. Through the post, a contract came for a house that I was thinking of buying. I'd been a social worker and I was going to buy a house. It would have been my first house. I saw the contract and I thought, no, actually, I have to abandon So I sent him back. So all these things I thought were going to be, a problem because I had to renounce all these things. I just kept getting rid of them. And I remember Lama Yeshe once saying that a lot of us, we were hippies, yeah, and he described what he called hairy renunciation. Which meant that we were giving all these things up because we thought we were kind of, we were trying to avoid life, basically. Actually, I think that's the thing. The way I took it was a way of avoiding life. Yeah? Rather than the sense of ngejong is somehow or other I live my life fully with an awareness of waking up. Instead, for me, I think renunciation became, I'm renouncing my life. I'm giving my life up in some way. That's not what it means, but that's how I took it, So I gave all these things up because I missed this subtle phrase, attachment to. And it was only gradually that I began to realize it's not all these things that are the problem. It wasn't my guitar and my this, that, and that. That's not the problem. It's my relationship to it. That's the problem. So if I really get very contracted around it being something that I believe is going to bring me so much happiness, and I get into that kind of compulsive disposition, then I'm getting into the attachment to it syndrome, if you like. And it's that's the message we need to hear. Recognizing that these things don't bring us ultimate happiness. They can be meaningful to us on one level and we can enjoy them and appreciate them, but it's when we get very contracted and we think that they're going to become a source of happiness on some ultimate level, we're missing the point. So it's about abandoning attachment to this disposition to get a bit obsessed and contracted into believing that these things are really going to give us happiness. Yeah. So then in that sense, we can see that part of the ngejong bit of waking up is recognizing where I get caught in things. And it's not about giving them up, it's about seeing that, I'm getting a bit too, this is becoming a bit too obsessive, like Netflix. There's a series on Netflix and I've watched one, I watch another one, and it's 11 o'clock, but I watch another one, and and there's a bit of that going on. I'm getting a bit kind of caught in this. I'm getting too contracted into it, too pulled into it. That's what we have to really be careful of, because that's when we're starting to go unconscious. We're starting to be pulled into a habit that is actually not beneficial for us. Certainly the next day, when we've been watching it till 1 a.m, and we've got to go to work. It's not beneficial. Or a bottle of wine. One glass of wine may be fine because it helps the digestion and so on. But 2, 3, 4. So it's noticing, or peanut butter sandwich. I have a problem with peanut butter sandwich. And in England we have this stuff called Marmite. You don't have it over here. Marmite and peanut butter is a combination that is quite a challenge for me. It's a source of ultimate happiness. So wrong attitude. Wrong attitude. So ngejong is really waking up to those patterns that draw us into unconscious habits that take us, that we begin to drown, we get lost. We lose awareness, we lose that capacity to be really awake to what's going on. Is that making sense? So that's the first of these 3 principles. And for Tantric practice, it's really important that we're not, Tantra is not about avoiding things in our life. It's about transforming them. So we need to have this attitude that engages with our life in a certain way and really is willing to wake up to those ways in which we misuse our experiences. Lama Yeshe once said, the problem is we don't know how to enjoy ourselves, which I think is a really interesting comment. You know, it isn't that we avoid suffering and what have you, it's that we don't know how to actually enjoy our life in a healthy way. Because we get sticky, we get caught, we go unconscious. He said we turn it into kaka. You know? And it's true, isn't it? There's lots of things in our life that can be very, very beneficial, very enjoyable. The danger is when something tips over an edge and we've moved into turning it into something which is no longer beneficial. So Tantric practice is about waking up to that process and transforming. So in that sense, Ngejong is a really important basic ground of understanding that the journey is about waking, keeping awake, staying awake, but engaging with our life and transforming. Any comments or thoughts on that? Does that sound reasonable?
So would another element of that be, like, say for me, I find I get caught in my idea of what the future is going to look like. Mm-hmm. And then when it arrives, it doesn't look that way, and I get all bent out of shape. And so that's another version.
And I think that's where what we're needing to do is to stay awake to that process. Because we'll do it. The important thing is to recognize when we're caught in it and its effect and so on. And gradually we wake up to the pattern and we won't repeat it. We're learning from it.
It kind of keeps happening and then you think, happening again.
Yeah, I'm doing it again. That's the emergence. We're waking up. So we do it differently and we change it. Yeah. So psychologically we can see this is very relevant to us, the idea of emergence, of we do see our habits, we do see our patterns, and gradually we see that we could do it differently. And it's something about being willing to take responsibility for that, rather than just going unconscious, denying it or ignoring it or hoping it will go away or something.
But also I find if I go, okay, I'm doing that, well, I better not do that. Then, like if I push it back too hard, it's like that doesn't seem
that doesn't always work either. Yeah. So we're learning, aren't we? We're learning about how to negotiate this territory. Yeah, all the time. So suppressing it doesn't do it. Acting it out doesn't do it. Learning about the pattern, waking up to it. Yeah, absolutely.
So how about the elderlies?
Sorry.
How about for the old people, the elderlies? They really get lost, if you take them out of the environment that they get used to, the habits, like you said. And how can they emerge from that?
Yeah. Does anyone have an answer? Yeah. I guess the difficulty is when we lose the capacity of waking up or being aware, isn't it? And with the elderly, that's quite a big ask, isn't it? To ask people to change those habits sometimes. And even if they're getting lost in it, sometimes it's not easy to support someone doing it differently. And that's painful to see, isn't it? But we can't always change another person. I mean, that was my sense as a psychotherapist, that I could support someone in waking up, but sometimes people are so embedded in a habit that it takes a long time to begin to be willing to change it, doesn't it? It's so ingrained. So in terms of my expectation or hopes for another, that's not always very easy for us to see, is it really? But we can do it for ourselves, perhaps. I mean, I hope as I get older that I won't just increasingly get to the point where I don't have that awareness anymore. I think that's time for me to pillow over the face. You know? No, I'm joking. But yeah. So I don't really have an answer to that, other than can we support someone in that experience to do the best they can? I mean, when I talk about the drowning, it's interesting, isn't it? If we think about people drowning in this, that jingwa thing, sometimes we do need someone to kind of grab us by the, collar and lift us out. We do need help sometimes, don't we? To wake up to where we're getting lost. So we can't always do it ourselves, it's true. Big problem. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Yeah, and are you thinking of someone in particular?
Yeah, my parents,
Yeah.
they passed away already, but when they, at the age of like 90, 95, you take them out of their environment, their habits and things, they are completely lost.
Yeah. And all we can do is to support them as best we can, isn't it? Without huge expectation. Yeah. Shall I go on to the second one? Yeah, we've got time. So I'm sort of looking at the first of these three principles. The second one is bodhicitta. So I guess our motivation in our exploration of something like tantric practice, or even Dharma practice generally, can be so varied from person to person, can't it? For some of us, it may be simply that we're looking for solutions to problems that we feel we have, and we're looking for happiness rather than depression or whatever. I think that was a bit for me when I first became involved in Buddhism. Maybe for some of us, we've had some inspiration that is really calling us to explore something and to sort of wake up to some ideal, some spiritual ideal. And there may be that process where gradually we begin to recognize that actually I may be on some spiritual journey, but just for my own sake doesn't necessarily make it so meaningful. We could enter into tantric practice or Buddhist practice generally just for my own benefit, and that can bring great benefit. But actually there's something about beginning to broaden our awareness to recognize that we're not alone in this, that we live amongst others who also wish to be free of suffering, to experience happiness. And also that our lives, if you like, are so interrelated to the lives of countless others. That what we experience in our life is dependent in so many ways on the lives of others. For all that we have in our life, the things that we enjoy, the things that we do, the things that we benefit from, they come through the efforts, the lives, the work of others, don't they? And their lives are not always particularly pleasant. So we recognize that we're very much interrelated with these others, but they're no different to us in wishing to be free of suffering and to experience happiness. So out of this growing sense of an awareness of others, the presence of others, and a compassion towards their lives, towards their suffering, towards their experiences, then maybe we start to look for some way of responding to that can be beneficial to support the welfare of others. And for me, I think one of the most important messages I received in my early years as a Buddhist was that within me, within each of us, is this essentially pure Buddha potential, it's Buddha quality. It was a great relief when I heard this, because I thought I was basically a sinner. We were talking about this earlier on this evening. Growing up in a Christian culture, I think, I felt that basically my essential nature was sinful. And even to the point where I remember feeling, if I relax and let go, all my sinfulness will come out. It'll just kind of, I'll exude it, So I have to keep really controlled. And then, so I was very uptight, controlled, because if I wasn't tight, then my sinfulness would come out and I'd be because that's who I was. Then I was in Nepal in 1973, and at Kopan, and one of the teachings that Lama Zopa gave was the teachings on Buddha nature, and he was talking about, from Maitreya's text, the Uttara Tantra Shastra on Buddha nature, describing all these ways in which our Buddha nature is present as this essentially pure quality, although it's veiled and obscured by lifetimes of messing about, and for me, the relief I felt at being given this message was palpable. It was like, and it was combined with the sense that actually that does mean that maybe I can relax a bit, and not be kind of, I can't let go because all my sinfulness will come out. Instead, there was that sense of actually, if I relax, then there is that essential nature that has always been there. It's primordially pure, and it may be temporarily obscured, but it's there. And it reminded me of something that Jung talked about, which is that on our journey of individuation, something that is very important for us to, something that arises that is very important for us are what he described as visions of wholeness. And we might have these in dreams, we might have these in inner visions that would arise just generally. But he said that these visions of wholeness were very powerful in calling us on the path. And I had a couple of these experiences when I was a lot younger, which really impacted me. In the same way that Lama Zopa's message of your essential nature is primordially pure, and it's how to say, we see it expressed in all the different deities and Buddha forms and so on that we encounter. They are an expression of, or an emanation of, or manifestation of that essentially pure nature. And that's in all of us, and it's such an important ingredient for us to recognize in ourselves and begin to awaken in ourselves. So if you put together this combination of a growing sense of compassion and an awareness of the presence of others in our life who are also struggling in different ways, emotionally, psychologically, physically, and so on, with the knowledge that actually we have within us this extraordinary potential to awaken to a quality in ourselves that can be of fantastic benefit to others. This is a powerful mixture, powerful cocktail, isn't it? That we recognize the suffering of others, we have a growing sense of desire to be of some service to others, and within that, the recognition that we also have this amazing quality that we can bring out. That as that starts to emerge, it can come into our life in a way that becomes a natural expression of our awakening nature in whatever we do in our life. Yeah, our Buddha potential, our Buddha quality can begin to come through what we do in our life in order to serve the welfare of others. So this is, if you like, the heart of bodhicitta. And when I think about it in that way, something feels different to sometimes the phrase that I remember hearing when I was in my early years as a Tibetan Buddhist. The phrase that came to me very often was, I must achieve enlightenment for the benefit of sentient beings. And the way I received that was, there is this goal, some point in the future of Buddhahood, and I've got to get there. I have got to strive to become a Buddha for the welfare of sentient beings. Now that sentence, I must achieve enlightenment for the benefit of sentient beings. That sentence in itself is full of so many contradictions. And apart from anything else, what it set me up with was, if you like, a strong ego. It was my ego that was going to get enlightened. Big mistake, that one. I must become enlightened. I must become a Buddha. I remember Chogyam Trungpa wrote something about the ego will never see itself become Buddha, or something like that. It was a phrase like that. He also said something else which really struck me as being very important. He said that we spend a lot of our time in our Dharma practice trying to achieve enlightenment until we recognize that the trying to achieve itself is the biggest hindrance to becoming enlightened. So we got two aspects of that sentence that don't work to start with. Who's the I that's going to get enlightened? And the trying to achieve is probably the biggest obstacle. And then Buddhahood is over there, some way off in the... Yes, sorry. It's over there. And I don't even know what it is. I've read the text, I've read all the books, and I've studied the commentaries on this, that, and the other. But I don't really get what Buddhahood is. But I know it's over there and I've got to get there. So this notion of enlightenment is a little bit elusive in itself and what Buddhahood is. I mean, I know the teachings, but something, I'm not sure I can quite get that sometimes. But the other bit of that is that it feels like it becomes so goal orientated, that my orientation is over there rather than present. It's not very present. And it's a little bit like I've got to swim another 100 lengths of the pool, trying to achieve, trying to push, trying to strive. But I was trying to do that, I have to confess, in my fundamentalist days. And at some point, something in me kind of snapped. And it was a kind of giving up. But it wasn't a giving up and, can't be bothered. It wasn't that sense. It was more a sense of, I'm doing something I'm doing here doesn't feel congruent, doesn't feel appropriate. And it was where I suddenly realized that all of that striving process missed one really significant ingredient which felt to be actually there in bodhicitta, but I was missing it, and that's the notion of surrender. And I was in retreat at the time, and I was getting very frustrated because I wasn't getting enlightened or something. And at some point, something in me just sort of snapped and gave up and thought, what am I doing to myself, And something shifted. And the shift was about, it was a phrase that was in the practice that I was doing, which was, in order to benefit sentient beings, I offer myself to the Buddhas. And something in me just clicked. that's at the heart of bodhicitta, isn't it? It's not about me trying to achieve something. It's about being really willing to surrender fully and open to this process of awakening and offering myself to the Buddhas for the welfare of sentient beings. Knowing that right now in my nature is that essentially primordially pure Buddha quality. And it shifted something for me, that bodhicitta was not about trying to achieve this goal in the future, but was about being really utterly present with that sense of, can I really let go and surrender and open for the welfare of others? Now, am I making sense? Yeah? Because I think bodhicitta is such a essential part of this journey that we're on. And it feels to me as though we can kind of lose the essence of something in it, as I feel I did. I was too much striving, got to get somewhere. And then, does that sound? I mean, maybe it's a different way of seeing it to what some of you are familiar with. But it feels like it's part of a paradox. There is a path that takes us towards a goal, but the awakening process is happening in the present. It's paradoxical, isn't it? You know? So bodhicitta has this paradoxical aspect to it. So then if we put this for a moment into the context of what Tantric practice may bring as another way of seeing it, one of the things that Tantra is often described as is the path that brings the result into the present. Because when we work with our relationships to certain deity practices, what we're doing is we're bringing into the present an experience of a quality that is already within us, that is manifesting in the aspect of a deity. So, for example, if I'm practicing a deity practice like Chenrezig, the Buddha of compassion, then as I begin to connect into that quality of Chenrezig in my nature, what I'm actually doing is waking up in the present a direct connection to that experience of my Buddha quality. So I'm, if you like, bringing that Buddha potential into the present and waking it up right now. This enhances the sense of our bodhicitta, because if bodhicitta is about really aligning ourselves with that deep knowing of our essential pure nature, to awaken it for the welfare of others, then every time I tune into the quality of Chenrezig or Tara or whatever it is, I'm tuning into that essential nature. And I can bring that into my life as an expression of bodhicitta in the present. Is that making sense? So these deities are really representing an aspect of our nature that has always been there. They're giving us access to it in the present as a reflection of its nature, being already pure, already present. So as I start to connect to that, I bring that into my expression of bodhicitta. Yeah? So that Chenrezig quality is that vision of my wholeness that I can awaken to in the present for the welfare of others. So the Tantric view of it subtly shapes how we might understand bodhicitta. Because we're always being brought into alignment with the source. You know, time and time again, we keep coming back to, this is my nature. I bring that into my life for the welfare of others. And that's a bit different to Buddhahood's over there. Yeah, it's a different feel to it. And it's interesting for me when I think about the way Lama Yeshe used to teach. He emphasized this time and time again. It felt very empowering to be reminded that your essential nature is there right now. If you stop messing about, it naturally emerges. If we can clear the ground, if we can clear the space, it begins to come out because it's naturally there. Then we can bring it into our life, in everything that we do for the welfare of others. That sense of bodhicitta, he was continually supporting that, and I always felt that was such a gift, especially when I was grinding away at the Lam Rim, 3 lower realms, blah blah blah, and then Lama would come along and say, "Don't forget, your essential nature right now is primordially pure. If we can open to that, we bring it into our life." Very encouraging, very empowering. We can do this, because it's in our nature. Don't have any doubt. It's that kind of feeling. Yeah, so bodhicitta. And everything that bodhicitta implies is that gradually the sense of self, the me, the ego, needs to move to one side to get out of the way in order to allow something else to come through. But that doesn't mean to say we shouldn't have an ego. The Dalai Lama once said, a bodhisattva needs a strong ego. And a lot of us thought, what do you mean? You can't possibly say that. But when you think about the responsibility that someone might take on to really work for the welfare of others, it needs a strong sense of self, not some wishy-washy, vague, I don't know who I am, kind of, it needs a strong sense of self. But he wasn't saying this is this sort of ego that is contracted tight and ego grasping. So we need to look at the third of these 3 principles. And the third one is the recognition of emptiness, or the growing insight into emptiness. And we can see this on 2 levels. One is in terms of self, sense of self, and the other is in relationship to phenomena and experiences. So let me just backtrack a little bit. Something that is really, again, essential in terms of the Tantric path and the Tantric process is that Tantra works on the basis that everything that we are and the whole of our reality is transforming and can be transformed. That's to say, it works on the principle that all that we are is changing, is transitory, is momentarily passing, arising, passing. And that because of that, Tantra works, it transforms, because it's naturally enhancing that transformational process. So everything that we are can transform. Doesn't matter how gross we might feel we are sometimes, or how bad we feel we've been sometimes. Everything can transform. And the reason it can transform is because it's empty. And what that means is that, okay, let's backtrack again. The problem for us is that we keep solidifying our experience. We keep freezing and blocking and contracting around our experiences. Yeah, we like solidifying because it makes us feel safe and comfortable and, familiar. So we seek, often in our life, things that will be, will give us a sense of security, safety, form, control, structure, system, sense of self that is relatively cohesive and solid and gives us a strong sense of me, this is who I am, my identity, so on. We keep solidifying, we keep contracting and forming, because something in us is not comfortable with space, with fluidity, with openness. Yeah? So as we grow up, our whole identity project is about gradually consolidating a sense of, this is who I am. It may not be a very comfortable one, because often this who I am is quite wounded, so we may have a very solid sense of, this is who I am, but I feel like shit, you know, because I'm not worth it, I'm not good enough. Yeah? But we've solidified it, so at least we know where we stand. I may be worthless, but at least I know where I am. So our tendency is to keep contracting and solidifying, and this goes fundamentally against our essential nature. And it also goes against the potential for transformation that is at the root of Tantric practice. Because Tantra is recognizing that we are fluid beings, constantly changing, without any solid, inherent, substantial nature, and therefore everything can change. But what am I doing? No, I don't want this to change. I want to stay where I am. And we do that all the time, quite subtly, don't we? In so many ways, we freeze our experience. Now, we do that because of safety and security and so on. We also do it instinctively when we've experienced psychological wounding. So one of the consequences of emotional wounding is that it tends to freeze in our system. You know, it freezes in our body, particularly in our energy body. So the process that we go through as we grow up in our life, often, how to put it, it often impacts us in a way that we then freeze and contract around. And that may have been the safest way to respond to it, is to kind of freeze it in some way. And so we talk about trauma in our system being frozen, being stuck and held and so on. And then the danger with that is that what we've done is we've set ourselves into a way of being that fundamentally goes against what is actually naturally how we are, which is momentarily arising and passing and changing and so on. We've actually locked something, we've frozen something. And as I say, we particularly do this about our sense of self. The term in Tibetan is daksin, which means dak means I, sin means to contract or grasp. So daksin means ego grasping. The problem is not having an ego. The problem is contracted ego. Frozen, contracted, solidified me. This is who I am. And we know it when someone pushes a button. You know? We're driving along and someone swerves out in front of us and all of that kind of road ragey sort of stuff. Something contracts. Or someone makes us frightened, we contract. And so on. So the ego grasping is that contracted, quite emotionally charged sense of self that we've solidified. The irony is that never existed in the first place. It's just a contraction around a particular instance of feeling. This is daksin, this is ego grasping. And that becomes a strong pattern in our nature that is freezing and blocking and is not allowing space and openness and fluidity. So if we're to embark on the practice of Tantra, we need to begin to soften and unfreeze, if you like, this disposition of contracted self, of ego grasping. Because that disposition believes, if you like, that there is an inherently substantial nature to my sense of self. And actually, if we try and find it, we can't find it. It's not really there. So in the process of unfreezing that, there are a number of things that we need. One is that if we recognize that it's empty, that it has no intrinsic nature, then that begins to see through the illusion of it. It also helps to live with an inner environment that is compassionate, that is kind, that helps us to begin to soften around that sense of self, so that we can begin to unfreeze it, to relax, to loosen, to begin to get a sense of inner spaciousness rather than tightness. And what that then gradually does, it means that we start to open to the fluidity of our being as a natural way of being. We start to let go of the contracted me and instead recognize that we are just a process. And that process is unfolding moment to moment, changing naturally. That's its nature. And it's that, if we can allow that, then the Tantric process will enhance that transformational process. So Tantra is about supporting what is naturally already there, which is our capacity for transformation. The problem for us is that we, as I say, we freeze it, we block it, and we get stuck. Yeah? All of that gradually leads to a growing, how to put this, a growing awareness of our inner space, our inner spaciousness, rather than inner contraction. And that spaciousness is the natural spaciousness of emptiness, of awareness itself. And if we can begin to inhabit that, then transformation on the level of our body, on the level of our energy and our mind is inevitable, because it's what naturally happens, actually. So that's the third, if that makes sense, the third of these three principles. And just as that sense of emptiness and spaciousness applies to the sense of self, we also open to the space of awareness of the environment that is also continually changing, arising and passing, that is also empty. So we live with that fluidity. And of course there's a part of us that may find that a bit scary, actually. You know, how much can we really live with the space of not knowing? Or do we want to know? You know, we want a little bit of, well, I'd like to know where I stand a little bit, rather than can I really open to space. It's not easy, but that's what we gradually do, isn't it? Should we have a break? Or should we have some, let me have any comments or questions, and then we'll have a short break.
Yeah, I have a question. That space isn't necessarily unknowing. I mean, there's an awareness in that space.
Yes.
So when you say knowing, you mean like knowing the future, like knowing what you're going to do, or that level of,
I want something to hold on to,
yeah,
rather than, because there's quite an existential edge to that, isn't there? You know, if I don't have something to hold on to or something to relate to, then there's a question as to whether I'm here or not. So if the space, and I've got nothing to kind of grab onto, in that sense, not knowing.
But the space itself is an awareness.
There is awareness and space. They're sort of pervasive of each other. The nature of awareness is space, isn't it?
So then I suppose if we could become comfortable with switching, I don't know how we would do that, but just theoretically,
What do you mean switching?
if we could, that need for wanting to know, if we could rest in the fact that the space we are in is a form of knowing, but then would it make us feel comfortable? Would it? I guess then that would be what we would need to do, hey? Is find some level of comfort in something that's shifting.
And just
you
letting
know.
go. Letting go
Yeah.
and opening.
Yeah.
Well, who is it that's going to feel uncomfortable?
Oh, the eye.
But that's just vanished. It's not there. There's no one to feel uncomfortable. So Lama used to say, just let go into that space of non-duality. And that's an amazing thing to do. It's not, there's a part of us that goes, not sure about this yet. Can I let go? But gradually we get used to letting go and opening and resting in that space. The other phrase that could come in that is, can we trust in that?
Mm.
But again, there's the question, so who is trusting and what are we trusting in? It's a bit of a...
Dualistic thing going
Yeah,
on there.
yeah. And yet, somewhere in that, if I let go and just drop into that.
Challenging.
Yeah.
Would
Yeah.
you call that faith?
Faith. Who's having
Love
faith?
and faith.
We get all these kind of dualistic paradoxes. Yeah. So what do you think, these three principal aspects of the path? Are there any other comments about them? That?
So
Yeah.
you said
Sorry. Go ahead.
emptiness, I mean you can let everything go. Nothing is no more important.
We've got two truths going on here. In the sense that because we understand and recognize emptiness, it doesn't mean that we negate relative truth. Yeah, that this flower has its relative aspect and it has its ultimate nature of emptiness. They're two sides of the same experience, and so something can be meaningful to us, relatively speaking, but empty in nature. Therefore, ultimately, what is meaningful? Yeah, but I think we can still bring meaning into our life, even we recognize that it's empty. No contradiction, actually. It's part of the paradox of our reality, really, of relative and ultimate truths. Yeah. We Sorry.
Yeah, you have mentioned about bodhisattva, bodhisattva, yeah.
Yeah.
So we have to look for that is as a, I mean, we have to give up our attachment to certain type of habits, I mean, routine things, and so it's not that bodhisattva is another pattern which we are going to attach to. I mean, is it like catch-22?
That's a really interesting question. I think it comes back to this relative truth, ultimate truth question again. There is relative bodhicitta, which you could say is a healthy pattern, in the sense that it's a healthy quality of intention that brings a certain benefit and has a certain kind of engagement with it. So there is a pattern there. There is a relative process of bodhicitta. There is also ultimate bodhicitta. So ultimate bodhicitta is the emptiness that is, if you like, pervasive of that. So those two are the two faces of a coin again, part of a paradox. Yeah. But yes, it is a kind of pattern.
And another thing about openness, we can't be always open. I mean, openness as a space, sometimes it's possible, but something bad happens, we have to contract. It is like your heart. Unless it contracts, it can't pump out the bad things. So it opens and contracts. So it both should be there to function as a heart.
As a heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the same way, we have to have openness and closeness, I mean contraction and relaxing.
Interesting. Yeah. So one could see them as part of a process. That naturally we respond to certain things and we notice the response, but rather than getting and freezing it and blocking it, we also allow it to move through and to re-emerge again. I think a good example of that would be grief. Someone dies, we don't just not respond, we go through the process of grief, which has a certain reactiveness in it, if you like. the problem would be if we froze the grief in some way rather than allowing it to be a natural process. So a lot of these experiences that we have where we experience something and there's the potential to contract. The problem is if we freeze it rather than, okay, we notice the contraction and we allow an opening to let it move through, then there's a natural cycle in that, isn't there? Yeah. Yes, please.
Yes, I want to ask about bodhicitta. I'm not familiar with Tantric practices, but I noticed some of the other Buddhist practices. There's a big emphasis on efforts, to attain something.
Yes.
For example, like recitation, you want to do like 108 times, or something like this.
Yeah. Or 100,000.
Yeah. So, when you were talking about how, when you heard the phrase that you're offering yourself to
Yeah.
the bodhicitta, and that kind of freed you up to not having the ego of trying to achieve it, and
Yeah.
attain it. But isn't that part of the fruit of the efforts of you're working toward that?
Yeah. So there may be stages in this journey, and certainly for me in the early stages, my ego was doing a lot of the efforting. It's true. I mean, I did 200,000 prostrations, which was either crazy or something. I'm not sure. But, and it required a certain kind of intention, and I know I had a lot of ego investment in it, for sure. The same with doing Vajrasattva retreats and so on. What I think I began to recognize was that there could be another way of doing this, which is maybe we still do the process of practice, but we don't do it with all of that kind of drive that's trying to achieve something. There's a lot more openness, a lot more spaciousness in it. Then the whole flavor of how we practice changes. Because I've done this myself, and I've seen some of my peers put so much effort, and quite often the result of the effort was lung. The Tibetans talk about lung disorder. We can get a sort of spiritual sickness almost from putting too much effort in. Not always very healthy. So finding the right attunement. Yes, please.
Along this line is when you practice or even just to meditate, and at least there's that ego part where we feel we want to have a sense of progress, even though we try to relax into it. Get the question, are we making progress, or are we fooling ourselves into thinking that we're making progress, but we're just not really doing anything much?
Well, let's be optimistic. I guess what we're recognizing here is that there is a journey here, isn't there? And the ego does play a part in it, and our ordinary intention plays a part in it, and gradually something will shift, and it takes time, and that's part of the journey. And I think we're learning all the time how to be with that. So it's not that I'm saying, well, we should stop any sense of intentionality or any sense of trying to achieve something. But that is part of a journey and a process. And that's going to change as our journey goes forward. And as I say, for me, there were points in that journey where I saw, actually, I'm really coming from the wrong place with this. I'm trying too hard. And so just let go a bit, give up a bit. So there's a constant feedback. There's feedback in the loop, if you like, that's telling me, oh, come on. I think maybe you need to relax a bit around this rather than push too hard. Meditation's really significant with that. If I try to meditate, something doesn't quite work. You know, meditation is a lot about letting go and releasing and relaxing and opening. You know, the word that is used for shine means tranquil abiding, and it's sometimes translated as concentration. It's not concentration at all. It's tranquil abiding. As at the heart of meditation is tranquil abiding. That's not trying to achieve something, is it? That's letting myself settle, letting go. So we've got this constant negotiation in ourselves between some kind of intentionality and letting go. Intentionality, letting go. It's there's a sort of paradoxical threshold all the time with our practice with that, I think. So it isn't that we don't put any intention in. We get up in the morning and go and sit and meditate. There's an intentionality in that. But at the same time, we need to be letting go within that in order to get the balance right. Yeah. I mean, life's a bit like that, isn't it? You know, the whole of our life is a combination of some level of intentionality and letting go and being open. So we're engaging with our life with a certain quality of intention, but we're also opening to the space of what unfolds. Paradoxical all the time. Let's have a tea break, otherwise we'll all die of thirst or something. Or boredom, I don't know. Yeah, let's have a break for, how long do you have? 10 minutes? 10 minutes?